Okay, welcome back. Do you have any questions so far? Any question? Okay, so if you have any question, make sure to also post it on the chat board. I will look, to that in the middle. So now the question that we have in here is, as we said, translation is concerned about, converting a text from one language to the other, and we have many different approaches, like the one that we have in Google Translate, which uses a neural network or deep learning and statistical approach for the translation from one language to the other, taking English as a focal language, which means it's going to be a pivot point where it will be translated from language A to English, then from English to language B. So we don't have a direct translation from one to the other in such a way. And we said the concern is not only about a word-to-word or a phrase-to-phrase translation, but it also has the issue of ordering, because grammar or word order is very important to really understand any sentence that's generated. So the translation system should be concerned about how the words should be ordered. And there are some tough things that we have to deal with. If you remember when we discussed word sense disambiguation, one of the challenges that we have is in every language that there are words that are ambiguous, that are having multiple meaning. And it does mean that such kind of words would also have similar multiple meaning in another language. Words might not be ambiguous at all in the other one. If you recall, we had taken one example, like the word chair in English is ambiguous. It can mean the furniture or a person leading the organization. But the translation for Amharic, for instance, if it is a furniture, then it's going to be wamber, which is a furniture, or liqa manbar, sorry, or we'll call it liqa manbar. If it is a person, or we will call it halafi, even halafi or liqa manbar, sorry. If we are referring to a person who leads an organization or a department, or even a meeting. So as you can see, even though it is ambiguous in English, the translation in Amharic won't be ambiguous. So one thing that we know is, unless and otherwise you have word sense disambiguator when you translate from English to Amharic, then you might make a mistake, because as you can see, the translation to Amharic is totally different than the English word. Now, why is it hard to do a translation? There's one thing is we have 2 or 3 steps. The first one is you have to understand the source text. Understanding the source text is very important. Then you have to convert the source text to the target language using whatever method that you use, whether it is rule-based machine learning, and from machine learning, whether you are using any of the machine learning approach or the statistical approach that we have. Then finally, after the translation, after the conversion, then you have to generate the correct text in the target, which means you might need to do arrangement of words, you might need to do, editing after that. So these 3 steps are very important for machine translation. And most of the time, the approach that we have can be a rule-based approach. Mind you, don't forget, we said the rule-based approach will be effective as long as all the rules and the exceptions are correctly captured and encoded into your program. Mind you, the rule-based means you are going to write a kind of an if-then statement. If it is a rule-based, if something happens, okay, if there is this, then you're going to say put this one. Else, if something happens, then do this. Okay, that's how it is done. That's how it is done, sorry. That's how it is done. So in a rule-based approach, you have to come up with many if-then rules. If condition, okay? If a condition, then action. What is the action? Maybe the action is to convert from one string of one language into the other string of the other. So this is what we do. Okay. So if it is a rule-based approach, the idea is all the rules, all the conditions, all the exceptions should be enumerated and well put in place in your program. But the other, which is a common, the most commonly used approach, is a statistical approach, which, depend on a learning process. In a statistical approach, we are trying to identify a pattern, just like we did earlier. If you remember, whenever you are given a bytext, what it does is it tries to identify a pattern. A pattern means something occurs frequently. In this case, we are looking for a word or a phrase in one language co-occurring with a word or a phrase in the other language in the bytext. Mind you, the bytext is a guiding data input. So in the bytext, if a phrase from one language co-occurs with a phrase or a word in the other language, then it indicates something. It should have been, it must be a translation of one to the other, a word or a phrase-based translation from one to the other, if they co-occur more frequently. ለምሳሌ the boy የሚለው ያለበት whenever you have a phrase the boy in the English sentence ልጁ የሚል በአማርኛው ላይ ካለ and if this frequency is high in number, if it co-occurs so many times, what does it mean? Statistically, this is a pattern that you should take into account to say that even though you don't have a dictionary, the co-occurrence of these bytext, mind you, the basic principle is a bytext is, or a parallel corpus means, a sentence in one language translated to a sentence in the other language. That's a bytext. So if we, as long as we know that these bytexts are equivalent in meaning, then if a phrase in one language co-occurs with a phrase in the other language in the bytext, then you can logically assume that these two phrases are a translation of one another. And if you make that decision, you can keep it as a knowledge. You can keep it as a statistical knowledge based on their co-occurrence. So understanding that source status will involve some, same problem as any NLP application, like how it is written, what kind of scripting does it have, how do you distinguish a sentence from one to the other, how you segment or tokenize words, would be an issue. Now, saying this, what are the challenges that we face in understanding the source text? The first one is lexical ambiguity, which means at a morphology level, there are ambiguities. At a morphology, mind you, morphology is concerned about the parts of the word. So ambiguity of a word or a stem, whether it's a word or a stem plus an ending. For example, in this case, if you see a pattern like this one, OWER, OWER, if it frequently occurs, that the machine can assume that this is a morpheme, because you know that a morpheme is something that is attached to the word. But mind you, in such kind of approach, you should also consider the remaining part. If the remaining part is not a valid word, then you're not supposed to, cut it off. But for a complex language or for morphologically rich language, such kind of issues are very important. The other one is ambiguity in grammatical category or in the part of speech. Like if you see the word close, then it can be a verb or it can be an adjective, like close friend, a close call, or something like that. But you can also say close the door, which is going to be a verb. Now, when you do the translation, which part of speech are you going to consider for the translation? Are you going to translate it as an adjective or a verb? And the verb, ካሰባችሁት ለምሳሌ ወደ አማርኛ ዝጋ ልንል ነው አይደለም? As an adjective ካሰባችሁትስ ቅርብ ልትሉ ነው። If you say a close friend, it means ቅርብ ጓደኛ ልንል ነው። If you translate it as a verb, then it means ዝጋ ነው የምለው። Close the door ስል ዝጋ በሩን ዝጋ ማለት ነው አይደል? So we know that this ambiguity exists. Previously, we have seen, the example, many ambiguous examples ለማየት ሞክረናል, and that would be a challenge. The other one is homonyms are a challenge, which means identical words having different meanings, like the word close is one example, the word bank, the word chair, even in Amharic, the word Ganna can be Christmas or it can be not yet. So unless and otherwise you have a disambiguation for this ambiguity, translation would be really challenging. That's why in machine translation, if there are some such kind of mistakes, then they are acceptable. you can do post editing to make a correction. Look in the word, the course can be ahead, or it can also be timid. So in case if the machine translation makes such kind of mistakes because of an ambiguous word, then post editing is, it's a good thing to do, or it's not as such bad, because we know that the machine translation cannot be 100% perfect in this aspect. We know that ambiguity is difficult even for human beings, let alone for a machine. The other issue is syntactic ambiguity, which means word order would be ambiguous for the machine. Which words should come first and which words should follow is another, when we consider grammar or syntax, this is what we have said. Some of the syntactic challenges are, we call it deep syntactic ambiguity, which means like if you have time flies like an arrow, we know that this is not, should not be translated word by word. እንዲህ ካላችሁ በአማርኛ ምን ልትሉት ነው? አማርኛ እንትን ጊዜ እንደ ጦር ይበራል ልትሉት ነው አይደል? እንደዛ ግን አንልም። In Amharic, the translation is, ይሄንን ወደ አማርኛ ትራንስሌት አድርጉ ብትባሉ ምን ትላላችሁ? What should be the translation? Time flies like an arrow. ምን ትሉታላችሁ? ማርታ
Yes,
ምን ትይዋለሽ? How do you translate this one? Time flies like an arrow.
ማለት ታይሙ ቶሎ ቶሎ ይሄዳል ማለት ነው
እኮ በይዋ ትራንስሌት አድርጊው። ጊዜ ታክሲ አይደለም ቆሞ አይጠብቀንም። አሃ እንደሱማ አንልም። ጊዜ ታክሲ አይደለም ቆሞ አይጠብቀንም አይደል የምንለው? ፈጣን ነው ባቡሩ አይደል የምንለው? Because this is not, mind you, this is one of the issues that we had in pragmatics, አይደል? This sentence doesn't mean exactly what the words are saying. It has some hidden, or what we call implicit meaning. So this is a deep syntactic ambiguity ማለት ነው. Okay? A shallow ምንለው ደግሞ is a normal structural ambiguity that we have. Like if you say the man saw the girl with the telescope, does it mean it is a girl having the telescope, or is it the man using a telescope? Is ambiguous. So to which one are you going to translate it would be difficult. If you remember, we have said ረጅም መኪና ጣቢ ብለናል አይደለ? So are you going to say the tall car washer, or are you going to say the guy who washes long cars, which is ambiguous when you translate it to English? So such kind of syntactic ambiguities are really a challenge that makes machine translation a bit tough. Even the other issue that we have is multilingual challenge, which means the challenge can appear because of, for example, because of the orthography, the orthographic variation. Orthographic means the surface form, the scripting or the styling method. Sometimes ambiguous spelling might have in the same language. አማርኛ ላይ ለምሳሌ ሊኖረን ይችላል. Like we use different kind of has, different kind of says, different kind of said. So it would be, ambiguous for the machine to distinguish one from the other. Of course, you can have normalization to correct some of the challenge. Then አንደኛው ላይ you can say in the parallel text, okay? In the parallel text you can have this one. አንደኛው ላይ you can have my country ብላችሁ, the Amharic version could be ሀገሬ. Then sorry, you can say ሀገሬ ልንለው እችላለሁ። ሌላው ጋር the same text, my country የሚለው ላይ ደግሞ I can say ሀገሬ ልለው እችላለሁ. For the machine they are quite different. Okay, so ambiguous spellings would be a challenge for machine translation. So to resolve this, maybe you can use text normalization ልንጠቀም እንችላለን. Normalizing the text to one standard. For example, in Arabic, sometimes they can write it without the vowels, omitting the vowels. So it will be ambiguous for the machine to understand that. The other challenge is maybe ambiguity in a word boundary. If you see, for example, the word ትመጫለሽ, the base form is መጣ። ነገር ግን ሞርፊሞቹን ልቁረጥ ብትሉ ት ይቆረጣል። እዚህ ጋር እንዴት አድርጋችሁ ትቆርጡታላችሁ? መጣን ወደ መጣ ለመምጣት you see sometimes whenever morphemes come together they would change their form ለምሳሌ ጠ ከፌሚኒን ማርከር ጋር ሲገናኝ ወደ ጫ ይቀየራል ት ወደ ቺ ይቀየራል እንዲህ አይነት ቻሌንጆች አሉንና such kind of challenges are very difficult for the machine to perceive or to understand. The other one is lexical ambiguity, which we have seen earlier. The word bank can be the financial bank, which is translated in such a way for Arabic, and the river bank, which has a totally different orthography. Or the same thing, bank na የውሃ ዳርቻ ነው የምንለው. As you can see, the spelling, the orthography, and the word formation is quite different. So this is another challenge that we have in here. The syntactic ambiguity, as we said earlier, I saw the man with the telescope በሚለው በአማርኛ ቢሆን ምን እንላለን በዚህ መሰረት ካልነው ቴሌስኮፕ the first case ከሆነ ቴሌስኮፕ የያዘችው ልጅ ሰውየው አያት ነው የምንለው አየሁት ነው የምንለው ስለዚህ I saw the man with the telescope እኔ ሰውየውን በቴሌስኮፕ አየሁት ለማለት ነው in the second case I saw ማንን ነው ያየሁት the man having the telescope ስለዚህ ምን እንላለን ቴሌስኮፕ የያዘውን ሰውዬ አየሁት ነው የምለው in the second case in this case the translation is ቴሌስኮፕ የያዘውን ሰውዬ አየሁት ነው የምለው in the first case ሰውየውን በቴሌስኮፕ አየሁት ነው የምለው እዚህ ሰውየውን በቴሌስኮፕ አየሁት you see the structure would give you a totally different translation so we have to be a little bit concerned about that so a syntactic ambiguity is I saw the man on the hill with the telescope ስንል ደግሞ የበለጠ ከባድ ይሆናል we have lexical ambiguity which means the word book in English can be translated into መጽሐፍ ወይንም ቦታ ማስያዝ ማለት ነው book my flight ስል ቦታ ሲይዝልኝ ማለት ነው so we know that lexical ambiguity is there we have semantic ambiguity like homography የምንላቸው written and pronounced the same but having a totally different meaning like the English word ball in English can be written and pronounced differently for Spanish. And we have polysemies, which means one sense of a word is a subset of the other, okay? One is a subset of the other in Spanish again. Semantic granularity, even though, for example, this is a word in Spanish, but it can be translated into 3 different words in English. But the semantic granularity is, they are talking about the same concept. Like if you see the word wait, expect and hope, all of them are talking about the future where you are hoping something to happen or expecting something to happen or waiting something to happen. So such kind of ambiguities are really tough for a machine translation system. That's why we dwell most of the time here using a statistical approach. So as we said, you can have a rule-based approach, which is all the rules and the exceptions or the irregular forms are well documented, or you can use a statistical approach, but people tend to use sometimes a hybrid approach. But mind you, the statistical approach is the state of the art that we have these days. Okay, so saying this much, let's try to understand this is a common representation of machine translation approach, and we call this one the empty pyramid to mean that a machine translation pyramid. So we are concerned about transferring a sentence from the source language to the target language. This is what we want to do. So whenever you try to understand the source language, that's what we call is analysis or synthesis. And whenever, mind you take a sentence in one language and generate a sentence in the other language. So whenever you generate the sentence in the other language, we call it generation. So you analyze this one and convert it to the target language. Okay, this is what we have. Now in here, you can look into the translation at 3 levels. You can look at it at a word level, at a syntax level, and at a meaning level. That's why we call it the machine translation pyramid. So the first step is what we call gisting, which means if you translate the word in the source language to a word in the target language, simply a word-to-word translation, we call it gisting, which means you will have the general idea of what the topic is, even though you might not understand or comprehend the whole sentence, but you will have some kind of, scope of the sentence. ለምሳሌ the player scored 5 goals ብዬ ብጽፍ ወደ አማርኛ ቀጥታ ትራንስሌት እናድርገው ብንል ምንድነው የምንለው ተጫዋቹ የተለያየ ቦታ ይቀመጥ ለምሳሌ 5 ተጫዋቹ አገባ ጎል ብዬ ብጽፍ Okay, this is just a word-to-word translation. We know that we're not talking about climate. We know that we're not talking about economics. We know that we're not talking about health. We know that we're talking about sport. ለምን ተጫዋች አገባ ጎል የሚል ነገር ጠቅሰናል. So if you have a simple translation of the words, then we call it gisting, which means you're going to, have information about the general information about what the topic is. So for instance, you can do word alignment for this purpose. For instance, እንደዚህ ቢኖረኝስ, let's say this is the sentence in language 1 and we want to translate it to English. ስለዚህ ምን አለ? Envelope her basis out to speak experience them settle at 1982 one methodology. So I know that the keywords from the sentence in the first language are this one. So this is what we call is gisting. So it means gisting can be done using a word alignment, which means aligning the word from one language to the other. And it will help you for the identification of translation equivalent between linguistic units, just like shown in here. So in this case, once you have that, what if you try to rearrange it? Gisting ማለት, you know about the topic ማለት ነው. Rearrange ስታደርጉት ግን, you see what happened now? We are trying to rearrange and group them. On the basis of this experience, a methodology was arrived at in 1988 ብለን ጻፍነው ማለት ነው. So the first thing that we have is this one. Try to translate it, okay, word to word, and this is gisting. In such kind of things, those units include single word units and multi-word units እንላቸዋለን, because sometimes the translation can be one word to one word, or a single word to a phrase, or a phrase to a single word, or a phrase to a phrase ሊሆን ይችላል when you translate from one to the other. If you remember previously in the example that we have taken, ምን አግኝተናል? The boy የሚለው ልጁ ተብሏል. ስለዚህ two words, which is the and boy, is translated to a single word, which is ልጁ. But the word የኔ ወይንም እዚህ የሚለው was directly translated to here, which means one word in Amharic to one word in English ሆኗል ማለት ነው. So the translation can be a single unit, a single word unit, or it can also contain a multi-word unit for the translation ማለት ነው. And we call this one gisting እንለዋለን. You see? That's what we call is gisting. Gisting is translating a word or a phrase from the source language to the target language, okay? So this is one example, okay? And the program has been implemented. La program it means an application. So a word to word እንደዚህ ይሆናል ማለት ነው. As you can see here, a single word is translated into 3 words. Here, the others are one word to the other one. Or the poor don't have any money የሚለው ላይ, this is a word to word translation, but in this case, a phrase containing 4 words is translated into a phrase containing 2 words. So you can have a single word unit, or you can have a multi-word unit for the translation, which is perfect. This is gisting, translating a word from the source to a word to the target. The next one is, we call it a transfer. So a transfer is concerned about syntax. And if you remember, syntax is concerned about, what is the concern of syntax? What is the concern of syntax? It is concerned about word order, which means, are the words correctly, ordered? And let's take one example. ለምሳሌ, if you say, let's say, the boy loves the girl ብለን ብንጽፍ, a word-to-word translation of this one would be ምን ይሆናል? እንደዚህ ነው የምንለው አይደል? A word-to-word translation of this one would be, sorry, ልጁ ይወዳል ልጅቷን አይደለ? ልጁ ይወዳል ልጅቷን ነው. But these should be reordered. እዚህ ጋር ስናስቀምጠው ምንድን ነው? ልጁ ልጅቷን ይወዳል. Now what have we done? Instead of, mind you, this is a direct word-to-word translation. The boy ልጁ ነው, loves ይወዳል ነው, the girl ልጅቷን ነው. So what we are going to do is, in the transfer, we are concerned about word order, because we know that the word order in the source language and the word order in the target language might not be the same. If it's not the same, then there is no change. But whenever there is a change, then we have to make sure that the transfer or the syntax of the source should be converted to the syntax of the target language. This is one important point. Okay. Now, saying this much about the transfer, a transfer means we have to map the source language sentence structure. Sentence structure means word order to the target language structure based on the word order model. Because we know that the order is not always the same from one language to the other. So we have seen a simple example from English to Amharic earlier, okay? So that's what we call is a transfer concerned about the syntax. The last one is Interlingua, which is concerned about the meaning, because we know that there might be many options of the same word being translated. And unless and otherwise we are concerned about the semantics or the meaning, then the translation might have a wrong interpretation at the end. So sometimes the structure only might not be enough for the translation. So what we have to do is we have a single structure might have multiple interpretation for the target language. So selecting the correct translation, so that the correct structure, so that the real meaning or the correct meaning be communicated or used in the translation is very important. And that's what we call is interlingua lexicon, or the meaning of the source language being converted to the meaning of the target language. So this is a very important framework that you should always keep in mind whenever you think about machine translation. We call it the machine translation pyramid. And usually whenever you do translation, we are going to follow this path, Malati. Okay, we are going to start, we are going to be concerned about the meaning of the source word. We are going to be concerned about the syntax of the source word. I mean, language, we have to be concerned about the meaning of the source language and convert it to that of the target language. So mind you, we have 3 levels, which is the source word into the target word, which you can do it using a dictionary, because if it is a word-to-word translation, you can use it, you can do it using what we call a bilingual dictionary. A dictionary translates from one language to the other, or you can do it using a parallel corpus, just like we did it earlier. And you should also do transfer of lexicon, which means the syntax of the source to the syntax of the target, and finally the meaning should be translated. So this is what we have for today. Tomorrow we are going to talk about statistical machine translation, and we are going to dwell more on word alignments using some statistical approach, and how translation can be done using a word alignment by using a bytext or a parallel corpus as an input data or as a training data. Okay, and that's it for today's lecture. See you tomorrow.